All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you coming to this. We are also recording it, so that could be part of, a lot of people this morning, and I know we're recording due to it being such a busy day. So we did some things in the morning where we re-recorded in the afternoon here for those that aren't able to attend. So appreciate. And there will be some handouts, which I think Tracy will get to the people that maybe are going to do the recording. So. My name is Ted Westerhof. I'm from your Employee Assistance Program, and today we're here to talk a little bit about the next requested topic, which I love to come and talk about because myself included, we all struggle with this, and it's called thinking errors, or what's commonly known as cognitive distortions. Has anybody heard of that at all? Just out of curiosity. It's a very common topic in the psychological world. We're well aware of it. Therapists work on this with people that they may see in treatment. But even therapists, myself, we all do it. We all do these things. It's a very normal part of the experience. But it pertains, of course, to the challenge of understanding what's called EQ. How many of you ever have heard of EQ? Okay. What do you know of EQ? What do you think it is?
Only because I Googled it before I came down here. It's emotional intelligence.
Okay, emotional intelligence, often referred to as EI. How many of you have heard of IQ? This is probably just honestly another level of stigma about mental health. So many people know about IQ. We worship what's called academic success, getting good grades. And I can tell you, working with the schools, working with employers, it's not that they really want to make sure that you understand algebra to do your job. These are not necessarily the skills that they find people struggling with that are usually related to academic performance. And we often will call someone with high academic function as being smart. That's different than being wise. Wisdom comes through not only your IQ, but your EQ and how those work together. What that means is there could be a lot of people with a high IQ, but maybe they struggle with these other skills that Indiana employers are actually looking for. So it's always nice to come back to Cuyahoga County Gov because Bowen now is in over, about 40 or 50 different counties. And I'll probably go to about 10 or so of those. But it's nice to come back here because I can tell a story, which you guys may know. My daughter goes to Warsaw Schools, and they recently did this little tour. They go to the manufacturing plants. I've been to so many counties. I know why they do this. They want to teach the students that, number one, we need people with trade and skills. Number two, they often have in their mind a pre-designed sort of preconception of what a factory is. And that is kind of like sawmill on the ground, dirt and greasy and covered in that type of grub. And then they go into maybe a manufacturing plant like one of the orthopedics and find out these places are actually pretty decent to work. So they take and they walk around, but then they hand to them, do you have the skills Indiana's employers are searching for? So what do you think's on this list of skills that Indiana employers are looking for?
Follow instructions.
Can you follow instructions? Interesting. All right. What else?
Probably something about communication.
Communication. Communication beyond one of these devices?
Yeah.
You guys hit the nail on the head, and they did in the early group too. It wasn't that they do CNC, that they understand how to work a lathe, that they know HVAC. Trust me, they want those skills. They will also teach people those skills if they're interested. But on here is, do they have a love of lifelong learning, self-confidence, effective communication, adaptability, integrity, professionalism, the ability to work independently, perseverance, self-discipline, initiative, attention to detail, problem solving. Boy, isn't this a unicorn on here? Connection. Can they regulate, which means can they recognize and manage their own emotions? Do they have the ability to collaborate or work well with others on a team? Now, how much of that is IQ related? You know, gotta have some cognitive functioning, but This is the topic we're talking about. We're talking about when you Googled that and understood what that was, our goal today is simply three things: to understand EQ. If you didn't figure out right there why it's important, not just to employers, but you would want this even on your own work team. You can maybe teach them the tasks of what they need to do, but wouldn't you love it if they could effectively communicate, or they had integrity, or they could deal with conflict and actually communicate and resolve it? I mean, people struggle in relationships in this. What are these common thinking errors that actually cause us to lower our EQ? Because what happens is, if we're in basically a decent mood, we've slept well, we're eating, we've got our basic needs met, we're in what's called a reasonable mind. And we're generally function pretty well. But when things don't go the way we want, we feel work overload, we feel stress, financial stress, family, inflation, politics. We'll talk about the last 2 years. All of a sudden, we leave reasonable mind and we start to enter the world of common thinking errors, which is, by the way, very normal. Getting stuck in them, though, is where our EQ matters. Why? Because do we just let our feelings dictate our actions, or do we actually control how we respond? Our feelings shouldn't dictate our actions, but they should give us clues. They should give us clues on how we want to act. So it's not that emotions are bad. When we don't regulate them, they take us all kinds of different paths. And they only want one thing, you'll soon learn. They want validation. Someone cuts me off in traffic, I don't want to think about driving effectively. I want to be bad. And I want them to know what they did to me. I got flipped off this morning. I don't know, but when you're behind a street sweeper, it's got this little blinking light. It's going about 10 miles per hour. It's saying, pass me if you want. I'm going down Market Street, which is a long street. And the car right behind the street sweeper doesn't want to pass it. So I'm just kind of like, put on my blinker. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go by. And they're like, not only do I not want to pass it, I don't want anyone behind me to pass it. What was that effective for? Well, letting me know whatever I did upset them. Was it effective for safe driving? Well, they were somewhat distracted while they flipped me off, but it was kind of like, I understood right away what they wanted. They wanted validation, and they wanted control of the road and all those wonderful things. I'm not even arguing there's anything wrong with that. Wouldn't I love that? What do you think emotional intelligence is, though? Okay, you know what it is. You've identified it. What is it? You didn't Google beyond the basic?
All I can think of is on The Bachelor, they got aggressive with this girl because she
They even used examples.
talking about her emotional intelligence, and nobody knew what that even meant. So that's all I can think about every time.
Okay, well, it's a good thing you're here today. We can answer. Anyone else? What do you think emotional intelligence? What would someone, if they had emotional intelligence, what would you expect of them?
To be able to communicate.
To be able to communicate, to be able to get along well with others, to have good interpersonal skills, to maybe have awareness about their own emotions. This is also key, which is very difficult for a lot of people, to have awareness of other people's emotions, that we all think and feel differently sometimes. I mean, honestly, if you haven't figured that out, you have your head in the sand if it comes to, modern politics and trends out there. You don't think people don't feel differently on certain subjects? It's not that you agree with them, you just understand that people think and feel differently. Well, let's go ahead and define it. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, let's start with ourselves, our own emotions, as well as to perceive and influence the emotions of others. Or how do we perceive and influence the emotion of others? But believe this, it's not just the fact we experience it. It involves a set of skills and traits. It means that just like IQ, it's not just being smart, you have to be able to apply it. And it means not just by getting in touch with emotions and then just, if I feel angry, then I automatically show everybody I'm angry. And you understand why you experience that. You understand the cognitive thinking errors, and you have a choice to either go down that path or apply skills. Why would you apply skills? You'll find out shortly. That enable individuals to navigate social situations, such as work would be a social situation, build positive relationships. That'd be great also at work and at home. But ultimately, you're going to hear me say this a lot. Emotional intelligence is there, just like IQ, to make you more effective in life. Not only is it to make you more effective in life, imagine if we had a scale and this was 0. Think of a cognitive thinking error as like a -1,000 and a skill as a +100. Not only does it help to get out of the trench, but it even helps to move forward with skills to be more effective. Because, and I had a great discussion with several people after the training that talked about, I needed to hear this, or I learned about this, and it's helped change my life because of how others were taking advantage of me. And that was awesome to hear, because you know what they realized? That what we're going to talk about today, without you being aware of it, myself included, we get stuck in thinking errors. That's called patterns of behavior. Do you recognize when you're in one? You've been in one probably your whole life in certain one of these. And do you just know that some days you're going to just go with it? This isn't like a morality where you're going to become some wonderful, better person. I just want you to be more effective. And other times you're going to be like, okay, I'm doing all or nothing thinking. I need to do pros and cons. Do you even have that ability to recognize when you're in a thinking error? Because if not, you'll see the end result. Can I ask you this? IQ is considered to be stable, meaning that, what does that mean? IQ is stable. So I know what that means. I don't know if you know what that means. Your IQ is pretty innate, meaning if you ever had studied anything about, that wonderful, like your intelligence, if you get scored on that, it's probably going to pretty much be that your whole life. I can take someone's IQ of 80 and somehow turn them into an IQ of 200 with the right set of programs. Some studies show that they can make slight improvement, but it really stays pretty stable. The question is, can EQ be developed? Can it be improved? What do you think? Yes or no?
I hope so.
I hope so. I love that. I hope so too, because why am I in this field, right? Traditionally, IQ, intelligent quotient, has been considered a relatively stable trait, meaning what you're born with, you work. It does, by the way, remember, I don't care how smart someone is. It doesn't mean they have wisdom. If you want to study why a great version of this, watch the movie Forrest Gump. He kept getting asked, are you stupid or something? Stupid is as stupid does. Meaning, forget my IQ. He showed a lot of wisdom in his emotional intelligence, his curiosity about people, his openness to adapt as his life changes to challenges, his desire to be loved. Yes, emotional intelligence can be improved through intentional effort. The question is how? By effort and practice. It's important, this is from the Emotional Intelligence Institute. It's important to remember that improving emotional intelligence is a process. It takes time and effort. But where can you do it? You can seek out resources such as books, and I put workshops in black font because we're doing one. It's a starting point. That's really all I want to accomplish today, to get you curious about this and to leave you with, an awareness of what those negative thinking patterns are and some options if you want to try to get out of them. Or therapy, which we will touch on at the end. Certainly, yes, you can use your employee assistance program almost as if you were going to work out at the YMCA and you wanted to work on your emotional intelligence. You wanted to learn more about, I'm struggling with this all or nothing thinking I have with my relationships, or the pressure I put on myself for perfectionism. I tend to label myself. You're doing all the thinking errors. And the thing is, you know it, you're not sure how to get out of it. I would go to a personal trainer. If I was stuck with some physical thing that I needed to improve on, I would go to a therapist to work on my EQ as well. Why is that important? Because we do this. This is a review from our previous workshop. This is called the bell curve, and you're going to get a handout reminder on it. In here is our natural IQ world, reasonable. But then something happens and we get triggered, and emotions do matter. In fact, this is wisdom. How do I feel and how do I think? But if my feelings take over, let's say a thing like anxiety or worry, in here, we used to say in a previous training, this is where crisis begins, where we start to ruminate. We're in a fight with our spouse. You start saying, it's not just about this fight. We're here now fighting about this for like the 10th time. So now you bring in all the emotional residue from the previous fights. And you get out of the reality of the moment and you start to explode and implode. And that's where cognitive distortions start to happen. The goal, of course, is to get us back into wisdom. Acknowledge how we feel, but really think about what's effective. And we have to get back in reality. The reason we get stuck here is when we're mad or even when we're worried. Worry loves itself. Anyone ever seen someone struggle with anxiety? They'll feel naturally anxious maybe for what has happened, but then they'll start ruminating on it. And they can go from worry to crisis to panic. And they're not sure how to get out of that unless somebody takes away what's triggering it. And that's not realistic in all situations. If I were to lose my father, he pass away, I can't have someone say, take away the pain. I'm feeling really anxious about this. I have to deal with it. And doing so, taking it away, would lose all the value that it brings to your life. Now imagine I'm at National Honor Society talking to the kids at Westerhof High School last Friday, and I'm telling them how anxiety has value in their life. Think these kids were open to hear that? Hopefully I can convince you today. What happens is you have these events that trigger, start the distortions. Well, how do we get to distortions? Well, the first thing is we ruminate on it. Imagine getting a little bite, and then you rub it, and you keep rubbing at it. That's what we do. We focus on what actually triggers and causes our anxiety or worry, which increases our distress level, which gets us extremely frustrated, emotional bell curve. And then we start to hit these cognitive distortions, these thinking errors we're going to learn about. I'm going to show you exactly what you do. And that leads to a natural, logical response. If you have a distressing event and you increase the intensity of it to increase your frustration, look at the compounding effect here. Without skills, and where should our response have started? Right here. We can respond at any point that we catch ourselves, but how we fuel it or how we use it happens right here, and it either leads to effectiveness or ineffectiveness. And if we're ineffective, meaning I get upset with my spouse about some issue that they did or didn't do, but then I start bringing in everything that they've ever done. Now they're triggered, and by the time I get to the point here, I have used this incident to get to the point we almost want to leave each other. And people will say this, how did we even get to this point? What did we even start fighting about? So you know what happens in here, events and how we respond actually feed themselves. We get stuck in what's called a negative thought loop. That is what cognitive and net thinking errors do. It's the one thing that we have control over that can either get us into an output. What is this doing? What does this want me to do effectively? Or without thinking, mindlessness, we get stuck in our thinking errors that just cause us to actually create crisis. So what are the most common thinking errors? Marcia had offered to hand this out. I want to go ahead and put it out too. I almost want to put us, when I used to do groups, I'd put you all in a circle when we would like do a lot of self-awareness and processing exercises. I won't do that to you today. It's the afternoon, you guys probably had a long day. When you look at these thinking errors, I told the group before, I want you to post this in your offices and cubicle areas. That way you guys can call each other out. You're doing it. So if you ever say something like, Marcia always tells us this last minute, I want someone to say, all or nothing thinking. She might only do that a lot of the time, but not all the time. Of course, I'm making this up. I don't. Nobody gave me any examples earlier, Marcia. Or you say they never appreciate what I do around here. Wouldn't that fuel what we just talked about? If you say it once, your feelings and thoughts and values follow what your thinking tells you. I'd start feeling pretty negative about my workplace if I was stuck in a thinking error. Now, what do I mean? I recognize it. I still do this, but then I'll think to myself, well, maybe they do 80% of the time. I'll try to be closer to the truth. You know? Because if I say they always do something, or if I said my wife always does this, it leads to, what's that say in the purple? Seeing things in black and white categories and ignoring the shades of gray in between. This type of thinking leads to rigid and inflexible attitudes. I have a mother, and I have a wife, which means my wife has a mother-in-law. So imagine if you dislike somebody, and then you start saying, they always say this about me. What do you think the attitude might be then towards the mother-in-law? Fairly negative, right? Even when they try to do something nice, you're like, I don't even trust that it's happening. And so I can erode the quality of the relationship despite my efforts to bring these two parties together and realize, remember, you both love the same guy. Why is that important? Because these things have long-term effects when we get stuck in them. They do. Let's look at overgeneralization, drawing broad conclusions based on a single event or a few isolated incidents. For example, if you fail at something once, you might assume that you're always going to fail in that area. Anyone have children in the schools? Or seen it? Yeah, have you heard of this thing called Power School? I was complaining about this in the first group. These kids can like check their grades like every 5 minutes. Now we tried to the 80s, so we got our grades once at midterms and then one there. So you got twice in 9 weeks. And what do we do most of the time? I just try to hide them from my parents. I wasn't like, but they like beat themselves up over it and just be like, I know I don't really have a C. If you would just grade that assignment, I know it'll switch it. Let it happen. I see so much amongst our youth as drawing when they get bad grades, thinking, I should just quit this. I'm no good at this subject because they didn't get that A. Or you can see the mental filtering, focusing only on negative aspects of a situation while ignoring all the positive ones. This leads to a distorted view of reality and a negative outlook in life. Imagine if you get a report card and you've got A, B, B, C plus. What do 77% of American families in a survey, how full is your bucket? You can read the book. What do they focus on first? C plus. You know, even if you're going to focus on it, focusing on it first, what does that tell your child when you focus on that first?
Most important thing on that card.
That whatever's on there, this is what drew my attention, the negative aspect. And we all took 77%. So I'm not going to say like we all think that we'd be in the 23%. No, come on. Like some of us would be like resisting the urge. Why? Because that's how we've been treated. It's usually these thinking errors are not just something you've done. Your parents have done them before you, your caregivers. If they focus only on the negative aspect of that situation, the issue is they're ignoring also the positive ones. You have a beautiful painting, and let's say there's a little tear in the corner. And you're like, once I see it, I can't unsee it. You ever hear someone say that? It's like my wife, when she's looking at picking out clothes, I was like, well, it's only a little loose thread. Oh, once I see it, I can't unsee it. So what does it mean for the whole garment? Yeah, it's either worthless. You won't even take the discount. Like, take it up there. Maybe it'll take 10 minutes. It's like, nope, because once I see it, I can't unsee it. Common thinking error. Jumping to conclusions, making assumptions about a situation without all the facts. I just had this at a manufacturer line on a lake just a day or so ago. They said, we had somebody do this, a whole shift. Thought the second shift, thought the first shift was not pulling its weight. Turned out we had like 3 machines down. But just because of some previous situations, they're just like, look, here they go again. This often leads to what? Misunderstanding. In this case, what I was brought there for, increased conflict. Sure enough. Catastrophizing, magnifying the importance or severity of the situation, imagining the worst possible outcome. This leads to excessive worry and anxiety. This happens when us guys just want to ask a girl out for a date. Do you think we imagine the best scenario? We're like, thank goodness you finally asked me. Why didn't we start this sooner? You think that's what goes through our mind? It's what if they say no. And what does that do? What does that lead to? Leads to excessive worry, anxiety, and probably inaction, avoidance. Assuming that everyone personalization is about you, even when there is no evidence to support that belief. I tell you, I guarantee if there's a complaint about property taxes, they are going to believe that the state of Indiana is after them and their property, right? You're like, well, values have kind of risen for everything. I don't want to hear that. You guys are after me. I'm going to appeal. I need to sit down with someone. You are after me. Have you ever seen that distortion? I guarantee you have. I heard it from my friends. Especially, I don't know what happened with property taxes. By the way, I love living in the county. Mine are okay. But man, some of my friends, oh my goodness, I've heard of personalization. And I'll say things like, I don't know that, the assessor is personally after you. Like they're going to somehow vote out the assessor and then, taxes are going to go down. The next assessor is going to come in. I'm going to cut all the values in half. Yeah. Well, that's a good, I don't know if that's even possible. But, in running for office, you can say a lot of things, maybe. Sorry, I found out I couldn't do that. Labeling, applying negative beliefs to oneself or others based on a single act or behavior. Think about it, a single act or behavior rather than recognizing the complexity of human behavior. This leads to cynicism and negativity towards self and others. You know where this happens a lot? I love JCAP and some of the programs. I understand substance use. A big part of substance use is that someone can have moments of sobriety and they'll have moments of relapse. Just because someone graduates, I know that, by the way, they're at risk for relapse for how long? The rest of their life. But someone will see someone relapse and they'll just label, I knew it. It's only a matter of time. Who's wanting to get the validation when we label somebody? Are we doing that for the other person or are we doing that to ourselves? And we do it to ourselves. Every January, it's like, okay, I'm going to diet. And then like by February, here I go again. You know why I tried? I'm just a failure. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Probably one of the most powerful thinking errors that a lot of us do because it has to do with the way we shame and judge ourselves. Almost similar to what I just said. Holding yourselves or others to a rigid and unrealistic expectations, and using should or must statements to describe how things should be. This can lead to excessive guilt and shaming. I do a lot of response, unfortunately, to critical incidents where maybe we lost a youth due to a tragedy, and the parents will say things like, I should have never let them go out. I knew this was going to happen. If only I could have said something differently. Why is that a distortion? Why is that a thinking error? Why would that be a thinking error? Can they go back in time and do that? But believe it or not, their emotions tie them to the belief that they could. And they'll beat themselves up about it for years. The valid part of this maybe is that they feel guilt. That is the price of caring. For those that don't feel guilt or remorse, that's psychopathy or being possibly sociopath type behavior. They don't feel guilt or remorse. I tell them over and over again, and we said from the beginning in the first training, I don't want you to get rid of your emotions. We need to give a place for them. So I was talking to National Honor Society. I have the pressure of being the last person to speak to them before they go off into the world. And as we were talking about these very subjects and what employers are actually looking out there, because remember, I'm coming from Bowen. I know they've had a lot of manufacturers come in and talk to them about the job market, certain, marketable skills. But I know the biggest concern for them in their first year in college, I work with Purdue Fort Wayne, 2/3 of the students we see are first-year students, usually dealing with anxiety. 78% of what we treat, first-year students. But I try to validate them because I said, you know what? I would be anxious. First year of school, what are some major things that you're doing? For a lot of you, you're leaving your parents, so you're now got a new living situation. A lot of you have left your friends that you know K through 12. Your biggest concern up to this point is whether you would have classes together. And I was telling National Honor Society, embrace these final weeks because this world you've known from K through 12 is coming to an end discreetly on graduation day. You will not come back after summer break and see these same group of people again. And that would be anxiety producing. The question is, What can we do about it versus be stuck in a thinking error? Let's see if we can identify. So here's our challenge. Let you guys read this over and see what thinking error you think this could be. A student gets a B+ on a test. Instead of feeling good about the grade and recognizing that it reflects their hard work and effort, they might focus on the fact that it was not an A. So they think to themselves, I failed again. I'm never going to get, by the way, this is a very real thing out there amongst our youth. Perfectionism is one of the biggest risk factors when I'm talking about suicide prevention. I am never going to get an A in this class. I am not smart enough. This type of thinking can lead to feelings of disappointment, self-doubt, anxiety, even though the student's performance on the test was actually quite good. Look at your list there. And what thinking error do you think that is? By the way, I haven't handed this out for those that have participated already. Here's someone back. This is actually a color changeable. I didn't know that until it's back to almost dark blue. But when I got it out, it's been, I'm dressed for the morning. I'm going to be sweating when I walk out of here. They were like bright blue sitting in my car, and then they slowly are turning back to the Bowen blue again. So I did not know that. So if you see anyone from the first group say, hey, did you know these, especially if you get hit by one of these things getting thrown at you, say, oh, by the way, did you know these are color changing when it gets, put it in the fridge or something. But anybody have a guess? What could be the thinking error there? Overgeneralization. I always say it's not what you think. They think it's something heavy. They're like, it's like this tiny little and that's got they love these little poppet things. So now we have stress ball comes with little pop things, where kids love these pop things. We hand them at our health clinics. Overgeneralization is one. Catastrophizing, absolutely. Oh no, Marcia, you're way out there. I may have to just roll it to you. Okay, she's like, she's like, if anything, I don't like the roll. I need to go to the bowling alley, or what I like to call the bowl hole. Catastrophizing, overgeneralization. Anyone else? Any final guesses?
Mental filtering.
Mental filtering. You part of the first group? Okay. Well, let's reveal the answer. In this example, the mental filtering, now you know why I asked you. But the mental filtering thinking error is that the individual is focusing only on the negative aspect of the situation, not getting an A, and ignoring the positive aspect, getting a good grade. This type of thinking can be problematic because it can lead to distorted perceptions. Now, what did you guys all say? Absolutely. It can lead to further distorted perceptions, which this could become a catastrophe for this person. You can almost see them headed down that path, and the overgeneralization of their own behavior, that I fail in this one, I fail in all of them anytime I don't get an A. They overgeneralize that behavior. And why? It leads to distorted perceptions of reality, more thinking errors, which of course can lead to unnecessary negative emotions, meaning the emotions that follow our primary one. For instance, if I get upset that someone wronged me, I may get angry, but really it might be that I'm humiliated. But if a distortion kicks in, it might be that not only am I angry, now I get to the point where I want to harm them. It's like, because now they represent everyone in my life that has wronged me. And that's where you see a lot of, those workplace violence or school violence incidents, that this reaction is way beyond what they may have experienced, that may have related to a personal bullying situation that they're now taking out on everyone else. That happens through cognitive distortions. Here's our second one. Let's say a person is trying to eat healthier, but they slip up and have a piece of cake at a party. This is another very common example. Instead of recognizing that it was just one piece of cake, that they can continue with their healthy eating plan, they think, okay, I blew my diet. I might as well give up now and eat whatever I want. What thinking error is this an example of? I did this one thing, and now it's like, okay, I'm done. All or nothing. All right, you got it right off the bat. Get another one. Small groups get more swag. In this example, the all or nothing thinking error is that the individual is seeing the situation as either I'm perfectly healthy or, of course, I'm completely unhealthy. Imagine that. One mistake away, and you're a failure. No in between, no gray areas for this person. This type of thinking is problematic because it leads to distorted perceptions of reality. One piece of cake does not a diet destroy. In fact, most diets allow for some moments of reward. But because we know there's a lot of emotions tied to dieting and other things, even substance use. Some people have substance use. I can't even have one drink. And what happens is they may have one drink and they might be able to keep from relapsing, but they immediately start going down a negative loop cycle. Now one just leads to another, and they start to rationalize it. We call this self-fulfilling prophecy. They think that things just happen, and see, I told you so, when they made that happen by their thoughts. We follow our thoughts when we're mindless. This type of thinking, of course, can lead to demotivating negative emotions. That's what happens. It starts to demotivate you naturally. It isn't that they're doing something morally wrong. Just think of the logic of it. I'm sending messages to myself that I am a failure. So what's expected of a failure? Not just failure, but being ineffective. Ineffective about dieting. Now I can't commit to a plan. I always give in to every impulse. You can just see the cluster of negative emotions and thoughts, and they travel in a herd. By recognizing and challenging what we're going to talk about in this error, you can actually develop more flexible ways of thinking, give yourself some grace, and actually lead to what we talk about. I said I would keep saying this, effective. Cognitive errors get in the way of us being effective in life. So the big question is, thanks, Ted, for letting us know the thinking errors. Post those in your places so you can call each other out on them. No, just kidding. Maybe you didn't even argue. I wasn't all or nothing thinking. I was catastrophizing. Don't you know, I like to make mountains out of molehills. That's what I'm good at. You can even say things like that, but that's what I know how to talk to you. It's almost like you embrace it. But on this other aspect, it is.
No. Oh,
Yours is, I will give you it. I don't know how I got it there, but it did.
thank you.
Really challenging the camera now, aren't I? I'm like do a 360 or something. So
I might let you wander off camera just to keep people from getting busy.
I like that. They'll like guess when he's going to be back. Oh, and you can say that too, and that or nothing. He always does this. Maybe I do. These % of the time. So what can we do when it comes to thinking errors? Basically, you have a list of multiple things on here, okay? But there are a few specific ones that help with thinking errors. All of them do. If we go back to that bell curve, you have a choice when you're triggered that you recognize it or that you catch yourself in one of these thinking errors. Let's say you're in all or nothing thinking. Maybe it's in a relationship, maybe it's work. My wife works in a certain area, and I have some buddies that text me every Monday morning. I talked about this in the first group, and they text me 80-20. What do you think my buddy was telling me? Not about the company on Highway 30. Worked with them for many years, fun company. It means 80% of the work is being done by what? 20% of the people. And I'll tease them. I go, at least you're overcoming all or nothing thinking. And they're not saying all the work is being done by me, but 80% of it being done by, you know what? You know why we can accept that? It probably is closer to reality. If they're saying I'm doing everything around here, well, maybe that person actually took on 2 accounts a day and you took on 11. Your 80% might be pretty close. And so I'll get back. I go, well, just try to keep out of the final, 20% and stuff. Why? Because it's a little bit closer to reality. If they start thinking, I do everything around here, that can lead to a lot of demotivation and passive aggressive behavior. Even 80-20 can, but at least it's a starting point. Why? We often look at this first scale. If you want to look down to the peach kind of there. Pros and cons. What does it say next to pros and cons? Reality awareness. It's getting away from distortion to reality. What do I mean by that? We're going to talk about this radical acceptance in a little bit, and it goes along with pros and cons. I used to teach for about 16 years a group for women that found themselves in abusive relationships or they experienced high levels of trauma. And I had one lady that, experienced high levels of sexual assault and trauma in multiple areas. And when she came into group, she was a pretty, what you would call hardened individual. Meaning, physically, where are the emotions? It's just kind of like, and you're just like, I'm going to take the challenge of working with her to somehow be vulnerable again. Because behind that tough exterior is a human being that's gone through a lot of pain. When we got to the thing of pros and cons, and I could not believe it. She stuck through group. When she first came in, she was telling me about everybody that was judging her by what? Personalization, jumping to conclusions. All she did was walk in the room, but she didn't like the way that person looked, and this person's talking all the time. They're trying to put me in their place. Why? She'd been harmed so much. She was going to make sure she got to everybody before they got to her. And 3 to 6 months later, she's sitting down there, and she's like, I just want to tell you about this pros and cons. It's been life-changing. She goes, I used to be an all or nothing thinking. You were either my ally or you were my enemy. There's people working here, even ourselves sometimes, to get validation. We will think this way. But some people keep that as a regular mode. She had released herself from that. And she goes, I don't want to understand pros and cons, but I do. She goes, I want to talk about all the assaults I experienced. The pros. First, I want to talk about the cons. You guys know it. Some of you experienced it yourself. It harmed me. I finally have embraced the pros. Everyone's just sitting here. One of those just tense moments. She goes, it led me to this group of ladies today that have been the most supportive people I've ever experienced, that have taught me to feel again. She literally did the pros and cons of the trauma she experienced. And guess what? It was reality awareness. She said before, I didn't even want to acknowledge what happened to me. Meaning she was living in denial. So she put people into either you're my friend or you're my enemy. And guess what happened every time a friend would maybe not answer the phone when needed or not meet her needs? Guess where they immediately went to? Enemy land. That rigidity kept her from forming any friendships, but she was able to use the pro. In this extreme example, you can do this in a daily example. I do it all the time. The pros usually of dealing with distress, let's say I'm not going to eat that cake. I'm going to actually go to exercise. Well, guess what? I'm going to be hungry while I'm exercising. That's a short-term con, right? That sucks. I'd really rather eat that. What's the pro? Long-term peace, happiness. We will comfort ourselves with cognitive distortions and be ineffective in life. So what can we do? There's other things that you want to look at here for the sake of time. And I just want to show you this. When you're in the midst of that bell curve, if you think of this bell curve, and it's deliberately on the back of this handout, if you just give yourself space and time when you're, upset, to get yourself back into a better frame of mind, the question is, how do you do that? What do those arrows point? Which direction do they point? They point out. Or do they point towards distress or away from it? When you're using a skill, you're actually, instead of ruminating, focusing on what's upsetting you, you focus on what you can do with it. I feel so much anger right now that I might pump this little guy. Why? I don't care what your little mental health thought skills are. For some people, intense emotions are only managed through physical exertion. We had a great doctor said, I do not want to give your kid any more Adderall. You've got a high energy kiddo that needs to be outdoors running around, and you've got him on devices all day. And when he gets anxious, you want me to medicate, meaning this distress is motivating him to be who he is, and instead you are stuffing him in a box. You're ruminating on the distress and you're saying, remove it, I'm saying reveal it. Distress can lead to you focusing on your thoughts, pushing away in the moment. You'll see on the list there, giving yourself opposite emotions. You know, like sometimes after a long day, I come home and my wife's like, I am not in the mood for one of your scary movies. I've had a long day. So you know what she wants to watch? A comedy or a rom-com, as I'm told they're called. So even though it's opposite to emotion, you know, for her, I'm more like, I'd like to go with my curry, but I'm like true crime addict, you know. You thought your day was bad? At least it wasn't this day. The point is, I take the very distress I'm experiencing and I turn it into some output in my life. I give a place for it. When that National Honor Society student came up to me and he said, you know, so you're saying the problem's in our heads? I said, no, the battlefield is. The battlefield is in your mind. Are you even fighting it? Are you giving yourself over to it with these thinking errors? I like to have this one up here just because it's simple. You can see in self-soothe sometimes, so for some people, just to get to the distress. And I did this in anger management. The guys would tell me, you know what, that guy was so lucky he wasn't right in front of me. They're basically saying, if they were standing me in this moment, I would have popped them. But since I ran into them 2 weeks later, we verbally got into it, but it wasn't near as bad. And I said, I don't want that to happen by accident. And we would actually teach them these skills to say, recognize when you're ready to go off on somebody, that's your natural impulse. Do this instead. And then they would have to actually report on it. Believe it or not, we didn't do anything with them minimizing the distress in their life, just how they responded to it. And it helped. Anyone ever heard of panic attacks? Do you know when they'll happen? No. So if anyone, I get this a lot from my youth. What can I do about panic attacks to stop them from happening? I was like, you can take some medication, and all that, but you know the number one response? Be still. Mastering what you do when they happen. There's people that suffer from panic attacks usually are like this. I don't want to ever have one again. You can't understand how helpless it feels. And sometimes I'm in public environments and you see them ruminating. And then there's a person that has skills. I have panic attacks. And when I do, I step out and I distract with activities or contributing, or I use comparison. Like they talk in a whole different language. Their panic attack leads to skillful behavior, meaning it almost empowers them. And you know what then? They usually have less frequency and less intensity because their mind is not so fearful about it in advance. That is the power of what we're talking about. Last one we'll talk about is improving the moment. I'm not here to teach these skills specifically, but just to show you, does that point, where does that arrow point? Towards distress or away from? It's meant, honestly, in this instance, to say this is what distress can do for you. Distress can lead you to your imagery. It can lead you to your spirituality and prayer. It can lead to meaning and purpose. It can lead to relaxation. It can lead to maybe your wise mind and your mantra if you're not spiritual. It can be a way that you can act one mindfully or take a brief vacation. You can seek encouragement, whether it's in your own mind with cheerleading statements or finding your peer support person. But you know what prompted that to happen? Distress. The distress actually brought this into your life based on how you responded. If you look on here, there are some other ideas. Radical acceptance is the final one. Oh, sorry, I skipped over. Accepting pain in my situation does not equal approving of it. I act as effectively as I can in each situation. Some days you'll be more effective than others. We're emotionally vulnerable at times. Maybe we've been fighting at home or have a lot of financial stressors, or maybe the price of eggs went up again. You're like, oh, you're kidding me. I mean, cereal for now. Yeah, I've done that before. Why? Because it gives me a sense of empowerment. I ain't gonna eat your eggs anymore. Then about 3 days later, I really want some bacon and eggs. It isn't the fork in the road, just the beginning. Here is your doors of cognitive distortions. And one of them is a skill that you might think of. You may find yourself going down these paths and selecting these doors. Look on that purple on your thinking errors and challenge you to see whether or not it leads to that pathway. There's the output. Do you want to be rigid and inflexible, negative outlook on life? Guess what? I do this sometimes. And sometimes I do have a negative outlook, but I catch myself and I correct it with intentional skills. But we're not skillful all the time. Ultimately, you see the difference of people with thinking errors. Here's another way to think of it. When you capture these thoughts in your mind, I'm a failure, I can't learn this, there's no point in trying. Those are cues that you're in a distortion. Anxiety or distress is bad and must be avoided at all costs. Hey, don't get me wrong. I love to avoid that at all costs, but it's not realistic. Can you also say to yourself, distress is painful and there is an opportunity to grow in it when I'm ready? Sometimes it may take years. This the example I talked about, she dealt with that for over 30 some years. And then finally it caused a growth. It's like a bulb, we say, that stays in the ground. Some of those are the most beautiful. When you are in a growth mindset, you're using some of these, you do say to yourself, you will find yourself saying, I hate it, but I do want to find a way to improve. It's almost a more honest way. I'm as effective. I love this one. Be as effective as you can be today. My final quote, I love this quote, but if you don't know, if you Google Viktor Frankl, he survived a concentration camp and he watched people respond to the distress of that event. Sometimes, despite their best efforts, they were murdered. But he said there was a distinct response for those that survived, that developed resiliency, versus those that sort of mentally just gave up, gave themselves over to the distortions. And he said, imagine that stimulus, between whatever causes you distress and how we respond, there is a space. It might be tiny, it might be huge, you never know in each situation. In that space is our power to choose our response. I should have highlighted this in bold. In that space is our ability, our power, our choice to choose our response. In that very response determines your pathway, and that is your growth and your freedom. He was talking about this very situation. When things happen in life, it's not just what happens. A lot of that we cannot control. We can only control what we focus on and how we choose to respond. If you focus on the wrong thing, it's taking you down the wrong path. Maybe you won't catch it there. You choose focus on what's empowering, it does take you down a different path. Or choose the other one for a while, see where it gets you, and then choose maybe later down the road to get off of that. If you're struggling at all, at the bottom, by the way, we use the same training at Wabash City Schools. I had 9 hours with them over the semester. The teachers love this. They gave us a little more time to go over each one of those and break into small groups and examples. But so many of them acknowledged, I do almost everything on this list. I said, I do everything on this list. I just know that I can catch myself sometimes. Sometimes I don't. But before I had this, I never even recognized the pattern. I didn't even recognize it. So what was my hope of ever getting out of it? If you're struggling, prepaid counseling is available through that employee assistance program. You can always get a hold of me to help, coordinate that. Or, if you want to contact Marcia and feel comfortable working through her and then connect to me, whatever you feel comfortable with. I encourage you to think about it almost as if you're going to the Y. You're seeing that personal trainer and you just want to get better. You want to develop that. It's not that there's anything wrong with you. It's that there's everything right about you. I encourage you to think about it. They love discussing this because it isn't overly complicated. And we have seen these things happen in our lives. And the other thing, the big discussion after my last thing, is we've seen other people do these things and how it impacts us. And if you're stuck in a relationship like that, you need to understand the importance of self-care, without a doubt. Thank you. Appreciate the afternoon coming to the smaller group, and I hope you guys, we're getting closer to the weekend. I usually come here on Thursdays or Fridays, but it's hump day. So I hope you get out, enjoy beautiful weather, distract with some activities, build some positive experiences. That's what I like to do. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.